I think we might get started. So welcome everyone. This is the first webinar that we've had for the Northeast and Flinders. So for you guys, this is all a bit new. So we've just set up your sites a little while ago. You're probably quite familiar with the probe information. What mainly what we're discussing today, although we will talk about the probes, is the other component of the tool, which is something that you're probably only just getting familiar with, and that's the pasture forecast. So that gives you basically what this part of the tool does is it translates what's happening with weather and farm conditions and your management, and how that relates to what pasture is available the next 3 to 4 months ahead of time. So that's a key planning part of the tool. So as I say, some of you will have looked at your probes. You may not have had a chance to look at the pasture graphs, which is what we're talking about. So the information was set up. We've got now 4 sites on Flinders, and we've got 3 sites in the northeast. So most of you in the room are hosts. What I would say is this information that we're talking about is not just relevant for people with a site. It's also relevant for all the other graziers within that district. So the pasture forecast does give us an information that can be used to make decisions across different farms. So I might just mention a couple of other little housekeeping things. If you please feel free to ask questions as you go, and also feel free to use the chat function, or raise your hand, or just feel free to put your hand up in the meeting and just ask a question, and we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So I'm just going to admit somebody else. Bear with me. Hello, Mike. Hello. Camera. Hi, Felicity. So yes, farming forecast, I say 2 key bits of information. We've got the soil probes, which give us information on soil temperature, moisture and rainfall. And we've got the pasture forecast, which is based on a farm system we developed for each of the hosts. And so I'm now, if I hand over to Phil to start the presentation, I may have to drive this presentation for Phil, but he's going to go through an outlook for each of the sites and probably a little bit of a refresher on how the forecast works, because as you guys have only had one meeting a few months ago to have a bit of an explanation of what farming forecaster is and what it does and how to interpret the information. So he'll do a bit of a refresher on that, and then we'll go into what we're seeing for each site. We've also got Marek here as well from AgLogic. So you would have met Marek at the different events up north. So we're working with Marek to establish all the probes in the ground. So he's our tech expert on the soil moisture probes, and he'll be available for questions as well. And we also have Nikki from TIA, you've met before, and Nikki's working with us on the sort of evaluation side of things, how a farmer's using this information. So throughout the project, she will be asking you some questions around what you value with the tool, what you use currently. Is farming forecaster going to help you make decisions, and have you made any decisions using the tool by the end of the project? So I will hand over to Phil. So I'm just going to open your presentation, Phil. So hopefully this is going to work. Can you all see that? Can you see that, Phil?
Yeah, I can see it.
Everyone see that the presentation?
I can now.
You can? All right.
Yep. Next slide. Tim, I just might get everyone to just put their microphone on mute. That'll just get rid of background noise.
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. Yeah, that'd be great.
Um,
Ben, are you able to put? Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Nice one.
Yeah. Look, morning, everyone. I just thought I'd start off with the regional map, which allows us to look at what's happening. So the first one I've brought up is the Flinders Island one with the 4 probes. And the number in the green circle is basically saying at this stage, our estimate is that that's the amount of soil moisture that is available to the plants at the 4 probes. So certainly June and July has changed those numbers quite a bit. Now I'm going to talk a bit more about those numbers in a minute. So I think one thing we've always found with the sites up in the southeast, it's important that you look at a range of data rather than just one. So obviously that's telling us pretty categorically where you are on the island, that moisture's in the top band at present. Next, Tim. Now, if we jump to the northeast and we're picking up a bit more, we've picked up a few in the Fingal Valley and some in the northern Midlands. Again, numbers excellent. So the sites go green if the numbers is more than 75%. We're just picking up the eastern end of the Fingal Valley, haven't had the rain that the other areas have, so they're back at those numbers that you can see. So again, I'll show you where you find that map so you can see what's happened over all of Tassie. Next. Now, when you open up the farming forecaster, you're seeing there's the top bit of the screen will be there. If you scroll down, there's a few important things. There's those three blue buttons, which I've circled in red. View regional map. If you click on that, that's where you get that map shot that I showed before. The next one is more probe detail. If you click on that, you get a lot more detail about your probe. You get a visual graph of what's happening. And if you click on more pasture details, you get a lot more information under that pasture forecast. So when you first open it up, on the left-hand side, you see probe information. On the right-hand side, you see the pasture forecast. If you like, that's only a summary. If you go down to these blue buttons and click on those, you get more details. And in the bottom left-hand corner is a whole series of weather information. Now, a lot of this information is you would get on Metai if people look at that on BOM. The idea it's here is that producers, when this was being set up, said we want all the information on one site so we don't have to go to 2. So there's a lot of information. And again, if you go lower down, there'll be one that'll say more weather information, and you click on that and you get a lot more forecast for up to a week in a 3-hour band. Next, please. Now, probes went in February, March. This is from one of the probes on Flinders Island, and this is the readings that have come out of the unit at the 10 centimetre level. So if you think of your probes, you've got sensors at every 10 centimetres. One of the things we've got to do is, after 12 months of probe, we get confident the probe's giving us good information. Right now, the probe is doing its job. The thing we're not sure of is where's the driest point and where's the wettest point. That's something you only find out over time. So, for instance, you can see what's happened. There was a bit of rain it went in, there was a drying. We got some rain in April, it kicked it up, and then it's bounced around as you'd expect with the 10 centimetre one because it's the most responsive. So we had this period in late May, early June where it had dropped a bit, and now it's rained and we keep getting little peaks. The thing I don't know, and the thing Marek doesn't know, and no one knows, is where is the absolute peak for this? At what point does the soil hit field capacity? And we only know that by looking at each rainfall event. Now, sometimes if you go in after a rainfall event, your probe might be saying 100%, and you look at it 3 days later and it might have dropped to 90. That'll be because I'll go in, look at the data and say, we've reached a new high point, so I just change things a bit, which changes the calculation. This is going to happen for a while until we've really bedded the probes down. So if you see a change like a couple of days ago, there would have been a change at a couple of sites because a new high point had been reached. So I just changed the numbers. I think if we look at that, the high point is starting to get consistent. So maybe we're getting close to that on the island. Next, please. This is the same site, but this is the info at 50 centimetres. You know, with that, we might well have the dry point for that one, which won't change. We went up. Now you see, while there was at 10 centimetres, there was a lot of response here. That moisture wasn't getting down to the 50 centimetres, so it sat constant, and now it's kicked up, which again gives us some indication is those profiles above are filling, and therefore water's moving down through the profiles. So maybe after every major rainfall event, I'll go in and just check the numbers. So if you see a sudden change, it's because we've reached new high points, and that's done on every probe at every sensor level. So even on the East Coast ones, which have been in for 2 years, I just made some adjustments on those the other day as well. Next, please, Tim. So this is what you see. Now, this was downloaded. I downloaded this on Monday morning. Again, when you open up, always look at, there'll be updates provided up the top. So I think I downloaded this about 7 o'clock on Monday morning. And what that says is this information, the probe, was updated 34 minutes before that. So at about 6:30 Monday morning, this information was constant. There's a weather station on this side as well, and it was updated 19 minutes ago. So if you go in and it's been updated on the day you're looking, there'll be no day written there. If there's a delay, say you look on what's today, Wednesday. If you look on Wednesday and it hasn't been updated from Tuesday, it'll say Tuesday and the time. Always look at that, because that gives you an idea, are things up to date? So as of Monday morning, and things won't have changed much, this site, so we can see up in the top right-hand corner, is the name of the site. That's the profile. So very, very good moisture through. So it's gone up 16% in the last 7 days, and it's gone up 28% in the last 30 days. This is the pasture forecast. We'll come back to that later on. So this is the information that is coming out of your probe, and that comes at multiple times during the day. It's updated. Again, if we go lower down there, we'll find that more probe detail, and you will see a graphic representation of what's happened since your probe's been in the ground. Next, please. I'm giving you a short snapshot today. So over in this top right-hand corner, again in the red, learn to use Farming Forecaster. If you click on that, you'll go to a series of short videos, which you can go, like there's one on the probes. There's a couple on the probes. There's a couple on understanding the weather. There's a couple on understanding pasture forecast. These are little 5-10 minute videos at max, which steps through helping you understand how you use this site. It takes a while, but that is the best site to go to, and you can do it in little snapshots, little pieces. You don't have to go. Now, just out of interest, this was the dry site in Tasmania, Benham at the western end of the Fingal Valley. That's what their probe like at the start of the week. So radically different to what we're seeing in the northeast and on Flinders. And you'll notice the difference in colour. So on the Flinders site, everything was green. Again, we use the same colour scheme. If it gets below 25%, we get this reddish colour. If it's between 25 and 75, we get this brown. If it's above 75, it's green. But they have gone up 13% in the last 30 days, but they're 70% drier than what they were this time last year. Next, please. Rightio. Now we're over onto the pasture forecast on the right-hand side. Couple of things I just want to step through. If you see shading in Farming Forecaster, that comes from historical data. So we use this program called Grass Grow. One of the great advantages of Grass Grow is that we run a weather file for that locality. So all of Australia's broken up into 5K grids. So we pick the 5K grid that is closest to your location or the probe location. So when I'm running this, when I download the weather data, I downloaded a weather data set from 1980 up until current time for each of those 5K grids. So there's nearly 40 odd sites in Tassie at present. There's 40 different weather files used. It's not the one weather file, all of Tassie, 40 different weather files. And I set up this farm system, which mirrors your place, but it is never an exact copy. It never can be an exact copy, but it's a robust view of what's happening on your place, but it's also a robust view of what's happening in the region. That's why it's relevant to people who don't have a probe to look at. So this is historically the green feed you would expect to see on the property. So in the dry years, you're way down here. So the red is showing us the 10 to 25%. So the historical 10% line is the bottom of that arrow. The historical 25%. What's that mean? 1 in 4 years, there was less than that amount of feed. This is green available feed on the left-hand side. There's the 50% line where the brown meets the green, and that's the 90% line. So this is a reference point. So, and I'm not even sure what site this is. So, you know, in tough years, that's where the green feed is. In good years, it's up there. So this is the spread of feed you would see on your place or in your region, driven by the last 30 years of weather, right? So you need a reference point. So that's what this shading is doing. The black line is the tracking line. That's actually what's happened at this site during the last fortnight. So that's the 1st of July there. This is what's happened in late June at that site. We've had some rain. There's been an improvement in growth. So we've moved from sitting around the average. You know, we tend to use that word for the 50%. That's the average, to better than average during late June. So all I wanted to highlight is where these various lines are, because in a minute I'm going to put up, when we put up the forecast, we can display it as a range of lines. It's important that you compare, when this red one comes up, it's important that you compare that red one with where this historical line is tracking. You're comparing forecast against its historical cousin or relative. Next one, please. Now, how do we do these tactical runs? That's what these coloured lines that we're going to look at in the minute. We know on the 1st of July, we knew how much food was in the paddock. We knew what moisture was in the ground. We knew data about the animals. So the program captures that information and stores it. And then what we get the program to go away and do is go and grab daily weather data. So the very first one we use at present is 1993. Grabs the daily weather data. And this is just an example from the 20th of June through to the end of August. Let's grab the daily weather data from 1993. And with that amount of moisture and pasture in the ground, what would happen to pasture growth if in this period we got the weather from 1993, and if we just follow the blue dotted line, that's what the program says would occur. Let's jump to the standout, red, 207. Same starting point, but if after the 20th of June we got the weather that this region got in 2007, this is what would happen to pasture growth. We keep doing that. What's this dotted? 1997. Right. I've just given an example there of 9. 9 runs, but when we actually do it, we generate 30 runs. So you imagine if I had put 30 curves there, it'll just be a very colourful piece of artwork that some of you might want to pay me money for, or maybe not. Right? So that's how we generate these tactical runs. We're using actual weather data that has occurred in your area between 1993 and 2022. The starting point is the same because that's what's on the place at the start of the month. And these are only generated at the start of the month. But you imagine if we put up 30 curves, that'd just be, you'd say, well, geez, what do I take from that? Nothing. Next, please. So what we do is these are the lines are the forecast lines, and you can tick what boxes you want to see. 10, 25, 50, 75, 90. Now I've just selected the bottom 3. I think when it originally comes up, you'll have 10, 50 and 90 on. You just click them off or click them on. So compare the coloured lines with their historical relatives. So the red is the 10% line, and I've just put the arrow to where's the historical 10%. It's down here. So straight away we're seeing that the forecast is running a lot better than its historical relative. In 10% of times over the last 30 years, that's where green food was. This is saying there's a 10% chance of green food this year following that path. There's a 25% chance of it following the brown line. There's a 50% chance following the yellow line. Right? If there was no historical data behind, you don't get much reference. The key issue here is we're starting off from a good position. We're then, in fact, travelling for at least 2 months, continuing on that. It's not till we get to September where these lines start to split a bit. So that's really driven by good soil moisture we have now. So that's rain in the bank. When we start to get September, pasture growth picks up, so we start chewing through a lot more water, and then the impact if things stay dry. So if you think of the red line, that's 30 years of data. So you think of 10% of 30 years is 3 years. In the last 30 years, you've had some pretty lousy years. They're the sort of years that would cause, if we got that, they're the sort of years that would cause that pasture curve. So check, compare how the red line, how the lines compare to their relatives. And what you want to see is what we're seeing now. They're all above the historical positions that have been in before. If anyone's got any questions now, just butt in. Radio, Tim. Now, these are 2 sites from up in New South Wales. I just want you to look at the one on the left and the one on the right. What's the major difference between those two just visually? You'll notice on this site, the lines are travelling fairly uniform, not much variation all the way through. If we look at this site, virtually from these, remember, these lines are only drawn on the 1st of the month. So on the 1st of June, the lines split straight away and they continue splitting. The black tracking line, and these coloured lines are made in the first place, the black tracking line finishes there. Over the month, the black tracking line is just saying things are tracking down. This site is exceptionally dry. There's no moisture in the soil, so therefore no buffer of moisture, and it's really reliant on what happens to rainfall. Right, so the risk at this site is high because the direction they're going to travel is purely driven by what falls out of the sky over the next couple of weeks. Now, luckily, in mid-June, they did get some rain and they kicked up again. Whereas this site, and these are about 150k apart, this site has moisture in the ground. So it really doesn't matter. The impact is quite small whether things are dry or it's exceptionally wet. And even once we get into September, it's not expecting October things to break away. So another thing yes, Tim.
Oh, sorry, just to say, Phil, while you're talking, we can't see you pointing at the different graphs. So if you could just say which left and right, or what when you're talking.
Yeah. Right. So, I've been using the cursor all the time. Sorry.
I don't think anyone else can see that because I'm running it. So if you can just So obviously we're talking about the higher risk profile on the right hand graph. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Right. Thanks. It's that big spread. Now, when we go into each of the Tasmanian sites, one thing I want you to look at is how much do the lines spread? If lines stay close together, it means that your risk is lower, and that's driven by moisture you've got in the ground as being a buffer. If the lines spread rapidly, that means you're exposed to rainfall, so therefore the risk factor goes up. So one thing you always look at each site is how closely do the coloured lines stay together or do they split apart quickly? Point number 2 is compare where the coloured lines sit against their historical relatives. They're the 2 key things you look at when you look at a graph. Next, please. Rightio. I'm now going to go through all the sites on Flinders and through the northeast. We'll start on Flinders and finish with the northeast. So this was downloaded as of yesterday. Now, the only difference, the one on the left-hand side, you'll notice down at the bottom right-hand corner, there is a little, can you just highlight climatology, Tim, with your cursor, because that was showing up. See, on that one, I've clicked climatology, and if we move across to the one on the right-hand side, Tim, it's clicked access. We're just using 2 different sources of information to generate these. Now, Tim, could you, next to the forecast word, there's a little I. See the little information button? You click on that information button when you're live, you get a text box up explaining things. So right across the site, there's, if you're unsure, if there's one of those little information things, click on it and it'll give you information about what it applies to. So what I've just been talking about with the 30 years of actual weather that you've experienced, that's called climatology. That's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you've clicked access button. Access is the program that the Bureau used to generate their seasonal forecasts. So the right-hand side graph is generated from 33 potential weather sets that the access model has produced. So the left-hand side, climatology, is driven by what weather you have experienced in the last 30 years. Access is driven by 33 runs of forecast weather. You can look at both. We're not putting any emphasis on it. It's both's available. Now, if we look at those 2 graphs, to me, they're giving me exactly the same story. They are very slightly different, but I'm not that fussed. If you see, to me, the major difference is the green line, which is the 75%. It's the forecast is saying the likelihood of wet weather is low, and therefore it's not performing as well. So, and quite frankly, after the years we've had a drier period, I think would be very beneficial, and certainly very beneficial for up here in New South Wales. We've been smashed with worms, and a dry summer would be a real plus. So there's nothing coming from, at this site, there's nothing coming from the forecast which is giving me any heads up that the season's going to perform any differently than what it's done before. So if we look at the lines, it doesn't matter which side you look at, the red and the green line are staying close together till about the middle of September, and then it starts splitting up. And that really is what's happened historically. Just look at your historical colours. In the dry years, peak green is about start of October, and then it drops away. Now remember, this is just green feed we are showing you. If that green feed is dropping down, it's because the amount of dead feed on your pasture is increasing. So it's not that you've got no feed on the property, it's just moving from the green pool to the dead pool. The current position is good. Going ahead, the lines are staying close together, and the forecast isn't radically telling us something that we should take serious attention about. And remember, this is all redone on the 1st of August. On the 1st of August, we get a new set of forecast lines, which will forecast August, September, October, November. I tend to not worry too much about, say, October at present, because I'm going to get another look at October in a month's time. I tend to look at the first 3 months, I suppose, of the forecast is the ones I pay most attention to. And if I look at that, I'm very comfortable with what I'm seeing. Next, please. So again, we're just moving across the sites. Again, where are the lines sitting to their historical relatives? Are the lines, how are the lines behaving? If anything, very, very similar trend. If it's funny, and this I'm seeing on this on a number of Tasmanian sites. If you look at the access button, which is the forecast, the one on the right hand side, someone might say, "Oh, the red line looks a bit better than it does on the left hand side." Look, that amount of movement is, don't get too hung up on slight changes. Again, to me, it's exactly the same story as we had before. Current position's good. Forecast looks good. The bomb forecast is not telling us anything radical. Thank you, Tim. As we keep moving across. Now, here's one where I suppose I think of all the Flinders one that might be, in fact, the access on the right-hand side is most likely looking slightly better than the climatology. That's partly because the green's been flattened. The lines are staying closer together and the red's kicked up. On some sites where you do get waterlogging, the program does pick up waterlogging. So in some sites, if things are slightly drier, we can in fact get better growth. So sometimes some of the improvement in pasture isn't coming from, we're getting more rain. It can be that we're getting better growth, especially in this August, September period. We're getting better growth because the waterlogging issue isn't as bad as it was. But again, there's nothing there that's saying to me, boy, I need to be thinking about doing something unusual in decision making. Next, please. Now here we've got Happy Valley, so we've moved to the south western side of the island. Different soils, different pastures. The certainly at this site things can dry off quite quickly if things turn a bit dry. So if we look at the left-hand side of climatology, it really is a site where if things dry off, things can turn very quickly. On average, things are progressing ahead quite well, but it can be quite a sudden change there. And so that's history. That's happened before. We look at the shape of the historical green feed. So the red line is doing nothing unusual. So there's a 1 in 10 chance of that occurring. I don't think a 1 in 10 is something I'd be focused on. I could well have in that site. Maybe I should have clicked the 25% line rather than the 75% line. And how does that perform? If we duck over to the access one, this should be the first time that we're starting to see a strong downward trend everywhere. And if we look where the yellow, the 50% line's ending up, it's ending up starting to get down into the red. So that one is I'd be interested to see once August comes along what October is throwing up. There's potentially there's some little flashing lights. I'm not putting it any higher than that. I'd be very keen on this site to see what the August forecast says. Next, please. I think that's one of the strengths of this program now. Every month it gets updated. So we're not relying on, we don't have to, at present, that's 4 months into the future. We can look at it 3 months into the future and 2 months into the future. So we keep getting updated on what's occurring. And if we keep getting good moisture during the August period, that is then the buffer. So if we look at the right-hand side graph, those lines are staying very close together until mid-October, and then they drop off. If we get another month of good rain, that could push that drop-off point out into November, and you suddenly get to a point where I've got a spring. We don't have to have a booming spring every year. Often, from my experience, some of our most profitable years are in average springs. So another month could change the shape of what's happening in October. Next, please. Rightio, we've now dropped down into the northeast. Very, very similar to what we've been talking about. Again, sitting well historically, lines very close together. Virtually no difference between which side you look at. That's really the forecast we'd like to see all the time. We're not going to see it, but that's a beautiful forecast. Thank you. Again, to me, this is all looking pretty comfortable. It's not till October that the line starts splitting up. Right through to then, things are travelling pretty comfortably. And really, when the lines do split up, they're just behaving as things have behaved historically. And adding a forecast to it hasn't made all that much difference. So you might, if you look at the right-hand side, for instance, the yellow line, it's dropping away to the end, but it's coming off a very high peak. So during early spring, that's really saying you're getting good growth. So you've already achieved a good spring by the time that yellow line drops off. So the quantity of food you'd have in the paddock is very good. It just might dry off a little bit earlier than what you've expected. Next one, please, Tim. And the last of the northeast. Some of these will have got different shapes because of different soil types and different pastures. Again, the story hasn't changed one little bit between what was seen before and either side of the graphs. So we are seeing that the forecast is tending to say that the back end of spring could be a bit drier than what we would normally expect. But again, it's coming off a good winter and a good early spring. So feed in the paddock could be there could be a good amount of feed in the paddock. It just dries a little bit earlier. Now, the one thing Tim, if you could just focus on the black line, please. Doesn't matter which graph you do it on. The one thing that should have happened by now, every 7 days, the model reruns itself with the actual weather that's occurred in the last 7 days, and that black line gets drawn. For some reason, there's been a glitch at CSIRO, and that hasn't occurred. But very shortly, that black line should extend out. When they run it, it should most likely extend out for about 2 weeks. Mind you, because those 3 lines are so close together, the black line's most likely going to go straight over the colour one. So with an outlook like this, it's not going to tell us anything radical, but it's meant to occur on about the 8th of the month, and 15th and 23rd, something like that. The black line is drawn, so it's just giving you an idea of where it's going. Now, in July and August, it's not going to tell us much. The black line becomes a lot more important once we get into September, October, when we really start chewing through soil moisture with plant growth, and rainfall becomes a bit more critical. The black line at that time of the year becomes a good tool to tell us which of those potential forecast lines are we in fact tracking along. Next, please. Now, I've clicked on the for pasture detail button. And at the top of that, you get a description of the site that was modelled, when things occur, what the pasture type is. There's a little picture down in that bottom right-hand corner. I'm on the left-hand side of the screen at present. And you can see the white box that highlights the 5 kilometre square grid that the weather is taken for, with the red dot indicating the probe. But up in the top left, under the word Oak Bank, it's not very clear, but it says last update 10 days. It's what I've circled in the red. Again, with the pasture forecast, these get updated every 7 days. Right, so it's important when you're looking at anything on the, whether it's the probe side or the pasture side, there's always an update and when it was last done. You need to look at that just to check. Now, on the right-hand side of, if I hit the more pasture probe button and I scroll down a bit, I end up getting, the model generates its own plant available water. So within GrassGrow, we don't use the probe data, because to run this model, we need 8 pieces of climatic data for every single day. So the model has to generate its own pasture moisture model. There is a picture of the Oakbank site at present. Now, remember, it has not been updated for 10 days. It has not been updated since the start of the month. So the rain that has been received at Oakbank in the early part of July has not registered on that graph at present. But the red dot is where the Oakbank site is at present, and the box plot is where it has been over the last 30 years for the same 3 days. So it's comparing current moisture to historical moisture. So before the last rain event, Oakbank was at the line in the middle is the midpoint. So there's 15 years the moisture's been above that. There's 15 years the moisture's been below. So the current dot for Oakbank was about 25%. That's at the drier end of the scale. So it'll be interesting when the update occurs, just how far that pushes the red dot up. I just pulled that up because Oakbank was a site that seemed to drop off a bit, and part of that would be within the model. It's saying it's a bit drier, whereas if we go to the next slide, please, Tim. We've got a northeast site. I think it's West Wyamby, and one of the Flinders Island sites, which is a Mississippi Valley on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, the red dot is way up the top. So what that's saying is that this site, compared to the last 30 years, is in a wet state. The probe at the left-hand side was telling us everything was 100% full. The right-hand side, the probe is sitting on average, but you'll notice at this site, the average and the top is not very far apart. So these two sites are sitting, according to the model, with very, very good soil moisture, which was reflective in what we saw in the forecast. The Oakbank site was a bit dry, but remember, all of these sites have still to be updated from that last rainfall event. So that's why that's what the tracking line does. So that at present, the forecast was based on what was the soil moisture on the 1st of July. Then the black tracking line will take account of what impact has the current rain had on pasture growth. And then when we get to the 1st of August, everything's redone. What's the soil moisture we've got on the 1st of July and then that 1st of August, and all the forecast lines are redone. September, what's the soil moisture we've got on the 1st of September, all the forecast lines. So everything is redone every month, so it keeps it constant and keeps it up to date. I think that's it, Tim. Pretty sure the next slide is blank. It is. So questions, anything people want me to go over, anything that isn't clear, this is your time.
Any questions? I think I was going to say, oh, sorry. Do you want to have it? Do you want to go, Will?
Yeah, just a question was coming in from Mum, Dad. There's an available feed. Is that based off a stocking rate that's inputted from us, is it? Or is it?
Yeah, initially when I built the site, I received data from your parents. So Tim, could you go back one slide, I think. We can't quite see it, but if you look down at the bottom left-hand corner of the left-hand side, there's an annual
Yes.
stocking rate. If you go onto
Yep.
the site, you'll see the stocking rate that it was set up at. So that was reflective of the information that I was given. Right.
Yep.
Now, sometimes I know Roger sent some information through a while ago. The actual stocking rate on their property is higher than what I've got, but they also grow a few winter forage crops, which I can't grow in the model. So I think the stocking pressure I've got on their property on the pasture is most likely pretty reflective of the pressure that the pasture's under. The property is actually running more stock because they've taken advantage of fodder crops, which has allowed the stocking rate to go up. So it's, as I said, it's never going to be an exact copy, but I reckon the grazing pressure I'm putting on your pasture is pretty robust compared to the grazing pressure you're putting on your pastures. For those areas where there's irrigation, I can't irrigate pastures, so this is reflecting of what's happening on the dry land component of the property. Dry land component on pasture, that's the grazing pressure, and the feed on the left-hand side is the feed you see in the paddock. And it's one of the things, if you like, it's an average across your property. So at any one point of time, you'll have paddocks that are better, you'll have paddocks that are worse, because that's been grazed, that hasn't been grazed. This is, if you like, giving you a running average of where the property is sitting.
Yeah.
Don't get hung up so much on what the number is. It's more important to compare it against where it sits historically.
Yeah.
So you know, if the current situation is in the green, historically, you know you're travelling well. When you feel very uncomfortable is when your current position's down in the red.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And is there anywhere that shows the growth rate of feed opposed to just the available herbage? Because that would
Yes.
be, yeah.
Yeah, on the main screen, you get a growth rate. I don't know. I think I cut it out of the slides, Tim, unfortunately. Yeah, it's below. It's on the right-hand side underneath that. So that's a snapshot of the screen. If you're on live, if you go down a little bit, there'll be a growth rate figure underneath that box on the right-hand side, which is the average growth rate for the last 7 days.
Yep.
Now
12 kilograms per hectare per day on this site. Just looking at it now.
That's for the last. That's the average for the last 7 days. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you go on there, there's a little one of those little information boxes. Click on that because it actually tells you what 7 days it applies for. Because, so if you look up on the right-hand side of our screen, if you look up under the word pasture forecast, near those binoculars, you can see it's last updated 10 days ago.
Yep.
Right, so the average forecast for those 7 days at present, because it hasn't been updated, would be at the end of June.
Yep.
Right. So it's a cost factor. When this was being developed as a project, Cyro ran their computer every day, so that black line got updated every day.
Yep.
That now costs money, and so the site's got to be managed to stay afloat. And so we gave away getting updated every day to save money. So it's now updated every 7 days. So that's why it's important when you look at the pasture growth, just put your cursor on the little information box, and it actually tells you exactly what days that growth rate applies for.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks,
yeah, Phil, Roger here.
Yes, Roger.
In terms of, to me, the accuracy of the predictions and what have you are obviously based on historical data, rainfall data mainly. So in some of these areas where BOM doesn't have maybe Phil and Will and Lucy, Oakbank wouldn't have had a BOM rainfall recordings historically, very close by. How do you sort of allow for that? You know,
Well,
how accurate that historical data is.
That comes back to these 5K kilometre grids, Roger. So
righto.
BOM use a variety of methods to take the measured data they have, and then I'll have to use the word average, but it's not quite, work that out across the landscape. Now, at most of the sites, and we had this discussion when we were actually at your place, I showed what the sort of numbers coming out of the BOM grids were, and we had a bit of a robust discussion about where that sat, and I think everyone was pretty happy except for the West Wyambi one. So it was a bit high, so I had to move to a different grid to reflect the drop off in rainfall that occurs from the coast as you move, as the rainfall goes up as you move inland. So it's never going to exactly. Well, the whole thing, Roger, is it's if we looked at your place in detail, there's going to be variation across the property. We had a look at about 20 years of data down in the Midlands the other day, and it followed the right trend across the years, and it might have been plus or minus 30 or 40 mil on what was recorded at the property compared to what the nearest 5K grid recorded. And the simple fact is that's the best we got.
Absolutely. No, that's fine. Sadly, I missed that.
Look, at some sites, what we actually end up doing is using a grid that does not sit over the property or the probe. Of course, certainly once we get into some of the high country of Tassie, we just found the actual grid that sat over the property was giving us rainfall that was 100 mils too high. So we moved one grid to the east, and that ended up giving us a rainfall figure that matched the property. So I'll always check with a property what they think their rainfall is compared to the grid, and make sure we sort of line it up.
Yep, no, that's good. Thanks, Phil. Yep.
Thanks, Roger. Does anybody else have any questions for Phil or for Marek about the probes? And I sort of, this is our sort of second go at talking about the forecast. So what I would say is there's going to be plenty of opportunity to talk through the information and how to use the tool and keep looking at the pasture forecast. We're going to be having a couple more events in your region, so I'm hoping that we'll have another face-to-face workshop with you guys in the northeast and on Flinders, probably in September, October, yeah, we can chew the fat and go through all of this in more detail. And I think I just encourage people to have a look at this information in the meantime. And if you've got any questions for Phil, Marek, or myself, please feel free to get in touch and talk through it. Pete Heading, we will organise something with Pete in your region, as I say, when Pete comes back from playing cricket in the UK. And yeah, so this is all being set up. The probe information is going to mature, as Phil said. There's going to be some tweaks to that, and I'd just sort of add that with some of this information, particularly the probe, the longer the information, the longer you have the probe in the ground, the more you can compare to history for the probe as well. So, you know, your probe's been in a few months, but you will have the ability to go back year on year at any point in time and compare what soil moisture is doing over time. So that's a really powerful part of the tool as well. Marek, is there anything else you wanted to say about the probes? Did you want to mention wild eye as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of you, by the looks of it, been logging into your wild eye account, which is good. But yeah, just going on what Phil was saying in terms of where we are soil moisture wise, it's filling up quite nicely. You're getting some nice consistent weather patterns coming through, and it's a really nice, especially in the middle of June, that we've got some rainfall that really started to recharge that subsoil moisture. So the way it keeps tracking, hopefully we come into spring with a full profile and not too wet. So hopefully that's consistent with what you guys are seeing around your region. So yeah, in terms of around the state, I think you guys and down the east coast probably have had the pick of the weather the last couple of months. So hopefully that continues. Yeah, but any questions or anything kind of that, just feel free to give me a buzz or send me an email. Yeah, happy to answer anything there.
Thank you, Marek. Well, I hope everyone's found the session useful. As I say, get in touch if you have any more queries, and we'll get back to you. And we'll keep you updated on activities. And we're going to run a couple of workshops in your region. So we'll be in touch soon. I think someone's put something in the chat as well. Okay, no worries. So yeah, so I think if there's no more questions, I think we'll end the webinar, and we'll be in touch soon with updates. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Tim. Thanks,
all
Phil.
right. No worries.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Ta-ta.